Hello, this is the Provoked Prawn, and I've spent the last week building in the Lian Li O11 Vision Compact so that I can bring you an in-depth look at the case and show you all the different highlights of a case that I built in multiple times in multiple different ways, because this is a very flexible case that allows you to do all sorts of things with push-pull radiator setups, side-mounted radiators, top-mounted radiators, vertical GPU, and more. I'm going to show you all the different highlights of it along the way. I'm going to take you on the journey through the various builds that I've done and talk about all the different things that I've found. Now, I'm also going to do an in-depth review and a full build guide on the case, as well as follow-up content on the fans that you'll see and other things in this video. But this is meant to be an in-depth look, an initial overview of the case to show you all the things of interest. It's a really cool case with some really interesting highlights to it, and it looks great as you can see from the shots. It's a very nice case to build in, and another winner from Lian Li. So stick with me and let me know what you think of the different builds down below. It's taken me a long time to craft them, so I'd love your feedback. This is the Lian Li O11 Vision Compact, which is a nice upgrade to the previous case and potentially really interesting. What you'll see here, for example, is there is a top glass panel included as standard. So you actually have a vented panel at the top and the optional glass panel included and nicely packaged in the box as well. This case is an upgrade to the previous one in a variety of different ways. Now, I want to say that this Lian Li product is fantastic, and you can see it has rear connect motherboard support. But what's interesting for me is Lian Li always sends up over these reviewers guides, basically telling you all the different things that the case features. And there are loads of different things in here that I'm going to try and show by building in it multiple times. There are several things. For example, we have a top area up here with some rubber grommets where you're meant to run the tubes from your all-in-one cooler. So basically you mount your cooler facing towards the rear, run the tubes through the top of the case, and then connect them to your motherboard. And that way they're mostly hidden, which is going to be an interesting setup. So I'm going to try that, side mount a cooler there and do that. And I'm also going to top mount the Hydroshift to show what that looks like and other things. There's also a anti-sag bracket for your GPU included as standard, and loads of other mounting options and all sorts of complexities, which are going to be really difficult to show off, but it shows how much effort and thought Lian Li puts into these cases, because there's lots of details. Small details like removable dust trays with magnets on the bottom that slide in and out really easily, and it easy to get in and out without any fuss. Included optional panels so you can swap things out. Loads of rubber grommeting for running your cables through and keeping things nice and neat. Obviously, the Vision is designed to be really good looking and have a build in there that allows you to create a really good looking aesthetic inside there. So I'm going to demonstrate that in a variety of ways, hopefully. So stick with me to see that. Don't make the mistake that I did here when trying to remove this door. If you try and unscrew it and then go to pull it off, you might find it's a struggle to get off. It took me ages to realize I'd made a stupid mistake because I was in a hurry and I'd missed something really obvious. So over here is a little bit of tape, which is basically just helping the glass to stay in position during transit. You need to make sure you pull that off first, because it actually restricts the door enough that you can't pull it off, and enough that I managed to damage the feet at the bottom, and I've had to bend them back into place because I was so confused as to why it wouldn't come off. So just watch out for that. Simple oversight that may be easy to do. Just a little bit of tape just there, supporting the very top of the case. It should be obvious, but it wasn't. So if you want to install the top glass panel, have glass up here instead of the venting, first of all you have to remove obviously the dust tray. Then you have to remove this fan radiator tray as well. So this slots in at the top as standard. And then it has multiple screws. It's screwed in at the front here in two different positions, over here and over here. And then multiple screws on the top at the rear and at the front of the bracket. And then once you've done that, you can then take it out. And then you also need to remove the front support bracket, which is this one. So in order to take that out, you have to remove about 7 screws. And then you end up with this open space. And then you can take your glass panel, pop it back on top. And then it hooks in over the front here at that top bit and then just screws in at the back. Now the case isn't going to be as secure like this because you obviously don't have that main brackets supporting it. So I'd recommend probably swapping that out until the very end, because what you don't want to do is to obviously break or damage the case when it hasn't got any panels on. You don't want to risk putting pressure on the glass, but also just with this on here, there's very little support on that. And once you take that front glass off, based on my previous experience with the previous vision, these panels, all of them are very much more wobbly, so it's easier to build in it and then take it apart at the end. But I'm showing you how to do it at the beginning, so it's really obvious. And once you've done all that, you can then put the glass back on. And then you've got that glass fishbowl design which people like, and you can see straight into the case. The airflow won't be as good, obviously, because you've got no exhaust panel here, but you could put 2 fans on the rear, 360mm radiator on the top, on the side even, intake at the bottom. You still have a nice look. Should be pretty good. Lian Li says there's no need to do this, but if for some reason you want to remove this glass panel, then first of all you need to remove these 2 thumb screws from the internal bit at the bottom. These screws here. Then you also need to remove a bunch of other stuff. Now, this isn't actually necessarily for the build process, but I wanted to show it in this video, so at least you can see how to do it and to give you a breakdown of the case and what it looks like. Also, because I'm going to be building in it so many times, I think it's better just to take all the glass off so it doesn't get in my way, based on what I did with the previous vision. But anyway, you unscrew those screws and then the front panel comes off. So this is just where the power switch is. And in order to do that, you have to do that because you then need to unscrew these screws here along the edge of the glass, which there are 4 of them. Then the glass should come away. As you've already seen, there's a lot of different reasons why this case is going to be interesting. And it breaks down into various different ways, but it's the little features, I think, that make Lian Li cases stand out from the rest. And there's a lot of them in various different cases in previous builds. But one simple thing, for example, is the SSD tray here and cable hiding bracket. Obviously, this door swings open. Now, it's held in with magnets at the top and bottom, but what's cool here is there's also another magnet on the other side, so it knocks onto that place as well. Now, you're not going to put it in this position when you've built, but during the build process, it's going to be so handy to be able to do that, to move it out of the way, or if you just need to access anything at any point, you can just flip it over to the other side. Now, also, it slides off, so you can either completely get rid of it or just move it over. And then you have all these different loops, which is a nice feature of previously in the cases as well. Basically just a hook that slots in like an SSD tray, and then there's a Velcro tie on top, and you can obviously just put it in there and slide it down. Now, this isn't as good as the dynamic Evo, where you had multiples of these that could slot in multiple different positions, but it still has some other ties at the top and bottom here as well. And then another one here, as you can see, which has the standard cabling in it. So it's clever little details like that that make a big difference, not only to the build process, but to the finished cable management setup as well, and make it a really nice case to build in. Another nice feature is the design of the radiator tray, which can be flipped around, so you can have it deeper or shallower, with simple unscrewing it with a thumb screw at the rear. You can then pop this tray out. Hopefully don't do that. You'll see it's now deeper, or it's bigger, so you can flip it around. So as standard, it comes like this. It does go in a lot easier than I made it look. Just I'm doing it from the front instead of from the back. But now it's deeper at the front than it is at the rear. So you can choose which side you're mounting a radiator on, depending on the view you want to achieve. I think I'll have it the other way around probably. But you can maybe use it like this in the deeper position, mount the radiator to it and set up push-pull fans, because there might well be enough room there. I'll have to investigate that and find out, but it looks like there might be. Another one is the adjustable GPU mount. So you can see you've got this anti-sag bracket here. And what you can do is loosen it at the rear and then adjust the position of it according to the size of your graphics card. So you can see it goes up and down quite far, quite a distance. So if you've got a small one or a massive deep one, you can adjust the position of it. And just secure it. And it's got a rubber tip on it as well, so I have a good setup there to ensure your GPU doesn't get damaged. If for some reason you don't want the SSD trays, you can just unscrew them. And then pull them out. See, a little bit fiddly, but unscrew the thumb screw, lift up slightly, then pull out. Obviously, that'll make easy for installing your SSDs if you're going to use them, but if you're not, it also opens up some cable management channeling down here. Sure, you could run the cables through there at the start and then put the SSD trays in, but it's nice you've got these extra ties in here. Just to demonstrate different possibilities, I'm going to use the Corsair RM Shift. The start of this, so I'm going to try and build on this in multiple different parts and multiple different positions. And we're going to start. Now this is actually good because if you look, you can see the rear ports are still accessible. So if you're using a BTF motherboard or a rear connect motherboard, there's actually holes there still. So no issues there. And obviously it's sitting nicely on the bracket. You can't access the back plate once you've installed the motherboard. Once you've installed this, you won't be able to access the back of the motherboard to do the back plate of your AIO or CPU cooler. Something to bear in mind. But one of the other things you'll notice is you can actually remove the shroud as well. So you could screw your PSU into that and then you can remove the whole shroud. Or maybe remove the shroud and install it into that and then put it back in afterwards. So it should make it easy to install things if you think about the process of doing it, like before cabling it in, for example. This is not my intention for the final product of the build, but it's one of the things I want to demonstrate, one of the different positions. So obviously this is with tubes at the bottom. So the air bubbles end up at the top of the radiator because some people will like to do this and would prefer to do it. And this is iCue Link setup, so I wanted to show some various different ones. But what's interesting is with that radiator in that large position, so where it can hold more at the front, so the radiator tray is that way around, you can do push-pull. So I actually have 6 fans on the radiator with these 3 rear fans supporting it through the tray. So if you want to do it, you can do it. I can confirm that does work, and there is space at the front still, as you've seen. And looks like a decent amount of space as well that you can see. I'm going to put some bottom fans on in a minute, but you can see it fits in there quite nicely. It's still fairly flush with the case. You should still be able to access all of these. I'm going to plug in all the cables and set it up and get it working with iCue Link so I can demonstrate what this looks like. Then I'm going to take this cooler off, flip it round and put the tubes through the back here, because the idea here is that you can use this hole to get the tubes to come through here and then plug into the pump. So we have a different view entirely. Another neat little feature here is trying to run the 2 8-pin CPU power connectors from the back. I realised there wasn't really the space to do it here in this gap, mostly because that's probably for the rear connect motherboard, but there's a rubber washer there that just fills in the hole. So if you're using a rear connect motherboard, you can just have that hole hidden away. And if you're not, you can do this and then be able to put those power cables through. So there's a bit of an issue here with the PCIe cable. So this is the 12R high power cable from the Shift power supply unit. Obviously with the Shift PSU, it's at the top, which is far from ideal in the first place. But the bigger problem is I can't get it down the bottom. So ideally I'd like to come from below the GPU. But because of the cable comb, it's too thick and it won't actually go below the motherboard. You can't get it through the gap where the motherboard sits and that other part there. How easy that is to see on the camera, but it just won't fit through this gap. So I'm going to have to go from the side, which I don't like the idea of really. Probably won't look as nice. And you might be putting pressure on the cable, so we'll see. Basically got to feed it through this way. There's not enough slack. Not a good solution for that, unfortunately. So this is one of the builds nearly finished. I'm not happy with it. It's not 100% perfect. I need to make some tweaks to it. One of the issues I've got is the PCIe power cable for the graphics card. I've had to come from above the GPU just because of the length. Came from below, didn't really work very well. There's too much tension on it. So this doesn't have as much tension as it looks like it does, but the cables also need tidying up, as does the 24-pin power connector. And also the top rubber grommet area is sort of a bit messy back there. You can see the tubes for the AIO also sit in a bit of a weird way, but they're quite inflexible with this cooler. So it's one of the problems with that. Not very easy to make them look nice. I was hiding them behind the GPU originally, but then it was pushing the GPU out a bit too much and also getting in the way of the USB-C cable. So that's how they're sitting currently. Not happy with that, but that's fine because this isn't the final build. This is just one example of what it could look like depending on how you want to build in it. Obviously, that's tubes down. I'm going to change it in a second to flip the radiator so the tubes will be at the back. But just now, I'm going to tidy this up, get some shots of this in this build, and see what people think of it. Well, I'm pretty happy with it. It looks pretty clean in this design. Obviously, it's going to look a lot nicer with a rear connect motherboard, though. Now, obviously, this is a pretty standard build that most people won't be doing. I think if you're buying this case, you'll probably be trying to make it look a bit fancier. This is just one of the variations of what we're going to do here. Now I want to take it apart because what I want to do is flip the radiator around, which is actually not going to be that easy. I'm going to have to remove this and the back plate, which is held in place by the fans on the rear. Flip the entire thing round. Put the tubes at the top because they'll have to be, because they're going to come through here, and then the CPU cooler is going to sit on top like that. So now I'm going to have to remove everything and show that process. But I think that'll look neater because your tubes will hardly be visible then, so they'll be around the back. Basically, through each step of this, I'm going to make it neater and neater. By the end of it, we're going to end up with a BTF build and then a cooler, either side mounted or rear mounted. I'm not quite sure yet. Basically, I want to try and show loads of different options of what you can do in this case. And it's very flexible. For the sake of maybe not using a load of thermal paste every time I swap these coolers out, I'm actually using a cryo sheet right now from Thermal Grizzly, which is this little graphene sheet that just sits on top of the CPU. I'm going to have to try and get that off carefully without damaging it, though. It's going to be one downside. So the idea with mounting the radiator in the back here is passing the pump through here, which is not easy. So you're putting your radiator on. Obviously, I'm just going to show the temporary mounting of it, but you put your radiator in place on the with the bracket facing towards the rear, which gives you more space, obviously, at the back. And then your tubes are going to need to go through here. Now, a few things of note is the gap is really small. Also, Lian Li says to watch out for your thermal paste, which is fairly obvious. I haven't got any thermal paste on here at the moment, but if you are installing a new cooler, chances are you'll have pre-applied thermal paste on the pump there. And if you try and pass it through this hole, you're going to end up wiping that off and destroying it. So that's something to bear in mind. You could maybe keep the plastic cap on, but as you can see, it's actually quite difficult to get this through there with the bracketing in place. So what I found is the easiest thing to do is to take the brackets off and then push it through. The other problem is getting it through without knocking the rubber out, which as you can see has now fallen out. So then you're going to have to flip it over and obviously run that rubber grommet area back over the tubes and put it back in, reconnect it. So that's going to be a pain. So it's definitely going to be tricky, but it will look neater in theory. And then you can do this with the tubes to make them look better at the back and stop them from getting in the way. Obviously, I've still got to sort out these cables as well, though. So it is possible to mount the radiator to the tray and then put it in with the rad on there. But I did have to slide it down a bit. And then while pushing it in, I also trapped my finger. I managed to trap my finger on the metal, and in between there, it really bloody hurt. So just be careful if you're doing the same thing. Make sure the rad is sort of pushed down towards the bottom, because otherwise it catches at the top of the case and it just won't push in. But now we've got it in this position, I can obviously then put the tubes through the gap and through that hole, feed it through to the front, and then sort it out round there. And note, of course, hold on. Note, of course, that this is in push-pull. So I've got 3 fans on the front, 3 fans on the back, and there's still space here. You can see there's plenty of room here. There's this nice gap on the edge where you can run your tubes as well. Obviously, if you're struggling with length at the front end, you can do that. Now it's over the other way. The trickiest bit is going to be putting this back, because it's going to be fiddly, but you have to remember to put it obviously over the top of your pump first. It's surprisingly difficult. This is quite a thick one, to be fair. I don't know what other ones are like, but I wanted to use various ones to a bit of show what that's like. But there you can see you can put that back, and then obviously I can mount this back on. But you can see how easy it would be to rub the thermal paste off if you're not careful during this process. So a few things, the tubes are pretty difficult, these ones anyway, because they're quite stiff to get looking neat at the front. So I've used a Velcro tie around the back to try and hide that away a bit. But you can see there's still plenty of space back here, and even with all the cables we've got set up, I haven't overly cable tied here, apart from here where you can see there's Velcro ties we can use to tie those down. But I don't want to tie this down too much because it obviously needs a lot of slack. And especially with the shift power supply, it might not be the best logical thing to do. Maybe a standard power supply would be better, or the edge power supply, which I might end up using near the end of the build with the BTF motherboard, rear connect motherboard setup, because that'll make it easier to access the cables and plug those in. But this is quite a nice setup still, I think. You can see how much space there is back here. I've obviously got the Corsair controller here, and yet still you can easily access all the things. So now I'm complete with my first build. I've started stripping it down. The goal here is to create a slightly different view, and there's some actually perhaps interesting sort of behind the scenes content here that's worth knowing about. So my plan was originally to take that iCue link setup I had, strip it out completely, remove this motherboard, swap to the BTF rear connect motherboard, put all the connectors, power connectors at the rear, then move to these fans, which I'll get to in a second, and also just set it up in a different way with a different cooler. So I'm going to put a 240mm cooler here for this next build, and then I'm going to do another build with a 360 on top, but that will be coming in a little while. But then I remembered that I've got to do the new Strimmer cables. So these are the new Strimers, which we have 2 of. There's the 12-volt high power one and the 24-pin. And these are actually wireless. So they're wireless. They're wireless wires. I'll explain more about that, but I can't talk too much about them yet because the embargo is a week's time. So expect another video from me on that. But so I can't use a rear connect motherboard for that setup because obviously you need to be able to see them and they'll be plugged in at the rear, which would make no sense. So I'm sticking to this standard motherboard for now. I'm going to install these fans on there, and then I'm going to set it up. Now I'm going to put some of the standard reverse blade fans on. So here we've got LCD fans on the right hand side, reverse blade, and then standards on the left. So I'm going to put reverse blades in there. So I'll intake there. We've got reverse blades at the bottom. So I've intake there. Now I'm going to exhaust out of the top through the radiator. Because I'm swapping the all-in-one cooler, I need to take the back plate off to use a different back plate. And this reveals what I was talking about earlier, is that you can't get to the back plate because of the power supply. But it shouldn't be a problem because I can just remove 4 screws from the outside of this. And rather than take the whole power supply out, you can just take the bracket out with the power supply in it. So this is actually a nice design of the case. And then I can access this. Sometimes when I'm making videos, I make mistakes, and hopefully it's helpful. I've made a pretty stupid mistake here. I assumed that because the last vision allowed you to mount a 240mm radiator to the back, they'd be able to do the same in here. Turns out you can't. You can only fit 2 120mm fans back here. A 240mm radiator, like this Galahad, just simply won't fit. This is the GPU bracket. It's just in the way. It's not as tall. This is why this is the compact version of the case. So make sure you read the manual before you try and do this. I've just wasted loads of time putting these fans on here and trying to work out how to install it. So you can't do this, which is unfortunate. But that's fine. We'll just have to rethink what we were going to do and go back to doing the top mounted AIO instead. It's a shame though, because I was hoping to show multiple different potential views. Here is the utter chaos of the cable management of the rear. Now, I've intentionally left it like this because I'm obviously going to strip this down again and build with the rear connector motherboard in a little while. And that's going to be the focus of the build guide because I think that would be the best looking build. But you can see we've got a USB hub from Corsair, which is basically taking the USB LCD fans as well as the USB wireless adapter. Now you could plug this into the back of the motherboard because it's got USB connection, so it can just go in a USB port at the rear of the motherboard. But I don't want to use a USB port because I don't know about you, but I put a lot of devices in my motherboard. So I want that free. So that will alternatively plug in with a cable into USB header and then a PWM header on the motherboard. So that's those two things. Then I've got a splitter cable for the fan power, and there's just a lot of other mess and stuff going on back here. But I'm leaving it and not tidying it on purpose, because it's still pretty spacious back there, as you can see, even with all these cables jammed in. Let me just shut the door, hide away that shame, and then flip it over. Turn it on. Obviously, you need to download L Connect before it all works properly, but we've got a lot of the lighting already. So I assume other people want to do this as well, because who doesn't love a good Strimmer, however the hell you're meant to say it. One of these RGB cables from Lian Li. Now, this is a new version. I can't talk much about at the moment, but it's a 12-volt high-power one. And the point is actually the installation process for it, because this is obviously a straight cable, which can bend, but, you know, it's a 600-watt 12-volt high-power connector, so you don't want to bend it too much. And ideally, I want it to look like this, come from the bottom. Much like we've got the 24-pin one here, it looks nice. Because of the way it's an angled adapter, you could theoretically come from this angle, but then you can see you're twisting it. But how am I going to do this? Because what I want to show you here is the interesting highlight, is if you remove the fan, I'd recommend doing this, by the way, if you want to access any of the bottom ports on the case on the motherboard, because you can see they're harder to access. And this is an ATX motherboard. And what I've found is it's basically impossible to get this strimmer down the bottom here because it sits so low. The gap at the bottom is so small. Don't seem to be able to get this in there. And I don't want to get it stuck, but there's basically not a big enough gap there. And it's partly probably because of this housing around the bottom here. So it's so fat that it just won't go through that gap. And in theory, I could maybe get away with just putting it like that. Maybe, and then just plug in the power cable in. We'll have excess, but might try that actually. And then just jam the fans back in. You can see that's putting pressure there now. It's putting a pressure on the ports being like that, and I just don't know what to do about it because I don't want to break anything on the motherboard. You could come from an angle, I suppose is what I'm going to have to do, is come from the very bottom here and then angle it up, but you can't twist it very far, so this case is not ideal for this, which is weird because they're sent them at the same time, but something I think it's worth pointing out. It's going to be a real struggle to use this strimmer cable in here unless I'm making a massive oversight in some way. It's just you can't get it down the bottom. Now, if you had a smaller motherboard, it wasn't ATX, and maybe it won't be a problem. Or so an interesting discovery is that I've tried it. So I was obviously trying it near the USB ports, and it won't work. But I've tried it over here near the front panel connector, and for some reason, there's more room. I don't really know why. because it now fits below the motherboard. And this is probably more logical anyway, because it's probably going to line up with roughly where the power connector is going to sit. So I'm just going to put it there instead. So this is one of the possible views that I've created in this case. Now, there are a few things here of interest, perhaps, and considerations that you need to pay attention to if you want to replicate what I've done. First of all, this is a 4090, which you can see goes most of the way across the case, but still fits quite comfortably, even with the Strimmer, which you'll note has a right angle connector, which makes life easier. However, that Strimmer does press against the bottom fan, so I did find that I had to maneuver it slightly because it was stopping that fan from spinning. So just bear that in mind. The other thing is you'll see the 4090 is blocking the display on the bottom fan in this setup. So obviously I have intake fans, the LCD reverse blade fans on the right hand side here, but the bottom one you can't actually see the display on. But you can mix and match the LCD fans and the standard SL fans now. So you could just theoretically not have an LCD one at the bottom if you've got a long GPU, but it's something I hadn't considered until I put the graphics card in, so I thought it was worth mentioning. Now, obviously, I've got a Hydroshift cooler in here. I only have a black one, so I've now got a black radiator and a black pump and black tubes in a otherwise white build, which I know will annoy some people, but I'm just using what I've got, and I wanted to demonstrate what the Hydroshift might look like in the case, so hopefully that will show that. But I've realised there's quite a lot of space up there still. You can see the large gap. So in a minute, I'm going to try and do push-pull. So I'm going to set up another 3 fans on top and see how much space there is. I think it should be plausible. But one thing you will notice, is I've only got one 120mm fan at the back now, instead of 2, because you can't fit 2 in there and the radiator. So if you've got a radiator on top, you can't put 2 fans here anymore. You can only have 1. And I think I should just about have enough space to do push-pull and still have that single fan at the back. But I think it will also block this top fan, at least some way. You might not be able to see the display again, so that'll be fun. I'm also going to vertically mount the GPU. I want to show how that's possible and what that looks like. But this is one of the shots. Now, obviously, I've got the support bracket in here, which you don't necessarily need to do, but I've thrown it back into the mix. I'm going to take it out again in a little while. But my idea here is to just show you all the different potential possibilities that you can build with. Now, this isn't the cleanest possible build. That'll be with the BTF. But as I said, I need to show the Strimers off and what they might look like in here. I'm pretty happy with it. I think it's come out quite nicely. And we've got multiple temperature readouts on multiple displays here. Obviously, you can do GIFs and static images and videos on the LCD fans if you prefer. But if you want multiple readouts all over the place, you can do it. So I've got CPU load, CPU temperature, GPU temperature, both on the LCD fans and on the display. So at a glance, you can see all your temps and everything really easily there, which is pretty nice. Also, the lighting on the fans is currently set to 75%, I think. So it doesn't blow out the camera, but they do go pretty bright. So they are pretty bright. They probably look pretty bright in the video. They're even brighter in real life. So they're very bright, probably obnoxiously so. I've set them to kind of subtle animated colors at the moment. Some of the animations in the color schemes are far too intense for me, very fast and very distracting. In fact, I wouldn't even have the Strimers moving like this. On my main build, I just generally set the colors to static color because I find it distracting out the corner of my eye when I'm gaming, for example. But if you like loads of RGB that's going a bit crazy, then this setup's probably brilliant. An interesting thing from this angle, from the rear, is you can see the fans through the case. Now, just pop the back off. You'll see where they're sitting here. It's obviously quite far forward because I've got the radiator tray basically facing backwards, which is how I set it up for the push-pull rad at the rear with the tube spacing through. You have the option to flip that round and do it the other way, so you could put them a bit further back if you wanted to, so you could have your fans sitting further back or further forward depending on your preference. So you do have options in where to mount those, which is pretty cool. So now I've got it set up with the vertical GPU mount, which, as you can see, allows us to show off even more of the Strimers down the front. And obviously I had to pull that through from the back, which is a little bit of work. But the other downside here, though, is that you can see the bottom of the support bracket for the vertical mount is basically touching the bottom of the fans. It's not stopping them from spinning, but it is jammed up against the frame of that bottom one on the left. The alternative was to mount it higher, but doing that would then block the display on the all-in-one cooler. Now, obviously, this is a 4090, which is pretty massive. You might not have this issue, but it is something to consider. The other thing is now that rear fan's a bit more visible. So from this angle, you can see that now, because it's vertically mounted, you can actually see that display on that rear fan a little bit easier. Obviously, this is going to depend highly on your setup and where you're sitting in relation to your PC, but it is something, maybe a benefit of doing it like this. And now we're into the push-pull state. So you can see that I put 3 additional fans at the top here. Now, I didn't have enough of the new fans, so actually these are SL-120 V2 fans. There's an interesting highlight here, which shows that I probably should do a versus video to compare the two. But you'll notice that these are actually darker than these. They're on the same brightness level. They're both set to 75% brightness. And noticeably, the newer fans are quite a bit brighter. And they actually have quite a bit more RGB as well. There's a little thin strip around the outside of them, as well as the larger sort of area there that is painfully obvious when you put the two together, which means I probably need to do a versus video to compare them in more depth when I can find time for such things. But as you can see, there's plenty of room here and still plenty of room between that and the motherboard. I had no problems whatsoever fitting those extra fans in there. I have had to shift the cooler over a little bit, so it is probably jammed this way a bit too far. But otherwise, it looks really nice. So it looks like I've gone, how many fans would you like? Yes, like a meme, and just jammed as many fans as possible in there. It might be overkill, and it probably, 1, doesn't look as nice, and 2, isn't as optimized, as efficient as having a side-mounted cooler with push-pull instead of a top one. So if you want to do this, I'd actually say push-pull on the side instead would be much more effective for cooling your CPU based on my experience and testing. And I am going to do some performance metrics in the review. So I have done testing with the cooler in a standard state without push-pull on the top, and I've also done testing with the side-mounted rad as well. So maybe check out the full review to find out more about that. But my gut feeling based on previous case tests is that having a side-mounted cooler is preferable. But this would still be pretty good. So we've got 3 bottom intake fans, 3 side intake fans, and then 6 exhaust fans on the rad and 1 exhaust fan at the rear there. So it should be pretty good cooling. I'd imagine the GPU will probably take a little bit of a hit in terms of the performance, in terms of cooling there, but it isn't like flush against the glass. There's still a decent amount of space between it and the glass. The Strimers are pushing maybe a little bit against the glass, but not excessive amount. So there's not a lot of tension there. I personally wouldn't do a vertical GPU mount in here, but it does look very nice. There's no denying. And now on to stripping the entire case down and rebuilding again. So I'm so tired, but hopefully this will be excellent. While I've been crafting this in the BTF setup, I'm using the Edge power supply unit here. I've been thinking about this, and I think this might be the best and easiest rear connect case that I built in. Now, I've only built in a handful so far. There was an MSI one. I've built in a Fantex one, which I've not published yet. A Corsair 3500X and the 6500X. But this is the best one, and I'll tell you why. In a simple way, these brackets for the cable tidying. Now, usually with the rear connect motherboard, you really need to cable tie with plastic cable ties to get all the cables out of the way of the power connectors at the rear, your USB connections and other things. But with this, you don't need to use plastic cable ties because you can just use these hooks. So obviously you can see here underneath this section that I've run the USB-C and USB-A cables there, HD audio front panel connector through there. I've got the 24-pin power cable going through this part. And then you can just hook this over the top and sort of keep everything in a neat way. And this means that things are just so much easier. Obviously, you don't need to overly cable tie anyway because you're not going to see any of these cables at the front. But this gets everything out of the way and makes sure there's going to be space for all the other connectors we're going to be plugging in at the same time. And you also have the Velcro on top. So not only can you do that, you can then obviously put more cables on top and tie them down with those. So you just stack your cables on top of each other. And it's nice and deep too, so there's plenty of room. Also, I don't know if you saw it, but my 3500 video from Corsair, I had problems with the rear connectors here because the case was too tight and it basically couldn't put the 24-pin power connector in. No issues with that here. Easily seats in here, no problems. Now I'm doing something similar to what I did before with the Corsair cooler, putting it through, obviously, this port. And the Kraken has quite a chunky display on it, which means that basically I had even more trouble getting it through here. But one thing that sticks out that I really want to highlight, in case I haven't mentioned it already, is obviously this hasn't got any paste on it because I've already used it previously. But in order to get it through, I had to remove the plastic cap and force it through this rubber mounting. You might be better off taking the rubber off first of all, before you try and put your cooler through the slot. But I still think that you're going to have a real problem. You can see just how difficult it is to get through here. I think the biggest challenge is going to be, one, getting it through that gap, and two, getting this over there without damaging your thermal paste. I've obviously cleaned this off anyway. I've cleaned it off already, and I'm not going to use paste. But if you've got a brand new cooler, it usually comes with pre-applied thermal paste. And so trying to get it through and onto the CPU block, or the CPU, without wiping off the thermal paste on this port or in that area is going to be really tricky, I think. So it's worth noting that. The other thing that's worth mentioning is the setup for this, i.e. running the tubes from the rear to hide them away, I think is going to be impacted possibly negatively by the cooler and the tube length. So this is the Kraken Elite from NZXT. And with the Corsair cooler, I had no problems. But ideally, you want to mount it with this port at the top because that's where the cables are going to run from and the tubes at the bottom. But as you can see, there is not enough length to do that. One of these cables is really tall, and that's because it's coming from the other side, obviously. So I'm probably going to end up mounting it like this sideways instead, which doesn't look too bad. Obviously, I can tuck the tubes away then. But I'm going to then have to run the USB cable out the side of it, which is not going to look anywhere near as neat. See what I can do about hiding them underneath the tubes, maybe. But this will definitely look nice, I think, once we tidied it up. But obviously, it's not ideal. Now, it doesn't really matter because you can rotate the display in NZXT software, but it isn't ideal. So hopefully this has been an interesting insight into the Vision Compact. I've obviously built it in several different ways now, and I'm planning on making a full in-depth build guide for this version of the case that you can see here. But also I'm going to do a separate review or go into a bit more depth and show you the thermal testing for the different setups and how that worked, and cover a few other things. So subscribe if you haven't already to see that. I will say this is a very nice case. It was really easy to build in. It's got very good build quality to it. Lots of different options, lots of little details that make a big difference. The simple things that I've shown you, like the magnets in certain places, the covers, the ability to mount things in different ways. It does limit you in options because obviously you're only getting top or side mounted AIOs really. And also you don't have loads of storage capability. It can hold 4 SSDs, is worth noting. But you do have plenty of space for building in, and you can do push-pull setups, although perhaps this is a bit over the top. You can see it looks quite cramped in this build, but if you want loads of airflow and loads of fans, you can do it. So it's a very flexible case, and once again, very nicely crafted from Lian Li, a high-quality product, really worth considering, and I really love what I've created in multiple different views. Let me know which one was your favorite down in the comments below, and come back to see the new videos on the Strimers and the new fans next week. This has been the Provoked Prawn. Thanks for watching.
You've made it right to the end of the video, you brilliant legend you. If you've enjoyed it, click that subscribe button, give me a thumbs up, and drop me a comment down below if you've got any questions. If you really enjoyed it, consider joining the channel and see the benefits of doing so. Check out these other videos. You might well find them interesting or useful. And most importantly, have a great life.